that same winter, the richest country in the world began a bitter journey downhill. The stock market buckled and crashed, and the nation's economy plummeted into the Depression.
On October 29, 1929, the Wall Street market crash marked the beginning of the Great Depression. Unemployment was rampant, people were living in Hoovervilles, and it seemed as if the so-called American dream was dying. In order to try and get away from the devastating effects of the Great Depression, audiences started attending premieres for new films in the theater. Now these movies had sound, and a new re-energized Hollywood was born. 1930s horror drifted away from the symbolism of the 20s, and entered a new era of realism. A fantastic start to such realism in the horror genre was with the films Frankenstein and Dracula in 1931. The first Universal monsters were introduced to audiences during a time of great stress. The time of the 30s were seen as the golden age for horror films, as the cycle helped form monsters that are still very much celebrated today. One of the reasons why these monsters are as celebrated as they are today are due to the performances of the people playing the monsters. Bela Lugosi, the Hungarian native, brought the character Dracula to life. The accent he brought forth with Dracula forever transformed how a Dracula character should sound like. In Frankenstein, the movie is loosely based off of the novel by Mary Shelley. It's unique in its opening, because it begins with Edward von Sloan giving a disclaimer about how disturbing the following motion picture is going to be. Oh, how far we've come. Other major films of the decade were ones such as The Mummy and White Zombie, which introduced viewers to more terrifying monsters in 1932. In 1933, a giant ape named Khan invaded theaters, and the stop motion for the time was absolutely amazing. New techniques in filmmaking were made just for this one film. It also inspired a new generation of kids to filmmaking. One time when I was like 8, I took the Universal Studio tour and I saw Khan in his full glory. I think I remember being so terrified that I cried because I was a little bitch, but that's besides the point. As the decade continued on into the mid-30s, plenty of sequels were released in order to try and cash in on what the original films had brought forth. The sequel to Frankenstein was no exception to this rule. The mad scientist aspect of these horror films wasn't just something trapped in fiction. During the 30s and 40s, the Nazis persisted with eugenics, which was the concept of forming the perfect genes in the perfect human. The Nazis used this to form selective breeding groups. Of course, it wasn't just the Nazis that did this. The Japanese also conducted biological atrocities during the course of the Second World War. A notable example being Unit 731. Unit 731 was kept secret and denied for 40 years by the Japanese government until the year 1984. Truly vile crimes that were once seen as just experiments were committed, including one where people were kept in pressure chambers to see how long it took before eyes started to pop out of people's sockets. Yes, as the 30s entered the 40s, the horror that was the Second World War was even more horrifying than anything film could bring. From America's perspective, they were safe from the horrors of Europe. You want to know what the name Adolf means? It means to be a noble wolf. You want to know what various Nazi headquarters across Europe were named after? Wolves. Hell, the SS was considered a pack of wolves. Germany was seen as the big bad wolf of the Western globe. So it's no surprise that in 1941, only around a week since the day that would live in infamy, a film titled The Wolfman was released. Lon Chaney Jr. continued a legacy inspired by his father, and also played as a monster in films. With its impressive special effects, it was a smash hit at the box office. And then after that, the 40s turned into a bit of a monster mash. I mean, there was Frankenstein meets the Wolfman in 1943, House of Frankenstein, House of Dracula. You have all these monsters meeting. I mean, it just became ridiculous. The cash cow was growing dry and audiences were starting to get bored of the monsters. In 1948, Abbott and Costello met Frankenstein and the once frightening Universal monsters became a joke. With World War II over and audiences getting sick of the same old Universal monsters, there would have to be a real change in the 1950s to try and save the horror genre.